Memory is a thief. It takes your moments, holds them hostage, and slowly, over the years, reshapes them into something you barely recognize. But what happens when the people who were there don't recognize them at all? What happens when your own mama tells you the clearest memory you have never even happened? Memory ain't nothing like what people tell you it is. It don't come wrapped in neat little packages with dates and timestamps, and everybody agreeing on what happened. It comes in fragments, in feelings, in the smell of something sweet hitting the back of your throat before your brain even catches up. And the worst part, the more you hold on to them, the more you turn them over in your mind like a stone in your pocket, the less you can trust that they're even yours. But they feel real. Lord, they feel real enough to make you get on a plane and fly 1,500 miles just to ask a dying man if he remembers the same day you do. If you ever had a memory so vivid you could taste it, so real you built your whole childhood around it, only to have somebody who was there tell you it never happened, then you know exactly what kind of crazy I'm talking about. Drop a comment if you feel me on this, because I need to know I ain't out here losing my mind alone. My childhood comes back to me in bits and pieces, like photographs somebody hung on a wall without any order or reason to them. Each one framed, each one standing alone, disconnected from everything around it. No thread tying them together, no storyline, no beginning or end. Just moments frozen in amber and suspended in time. There was the time I challenged my brother to a foot race down the steps of the rocky hill on the side of my grandfather's house in Haiti. Those stone steps had been there forever, cut into the red earth like somebody carved them with a knife and left them rough on purpose. My mama had warned us about that hill more times than I can count. Shed put her hands on her hips, lower her voice the way she did when she meant business, and say, "Do not run down that hill. Y'all gone. Break your necks, and I ain't taking nobody to the hospital today." But that warning didn't stop us. Not even a little bit. We waited for her to leave for work, stood at the top of that hill, and looked at each other with that kind of grin. Only kids who are about to do something they got no business doing can produce. My brother counted to 3. I don't remember who took the first step, but I remember the feeling of the ground moving under my feet, the rocks shifting and sliding beneath my sandals, and the wind pulling at my clothes like the whole world was trying to slow me down. My brother was 2 years older and twice as fast. Haid already hit the bottom by the time I was still halfway down, skidding to a stop in a cloud of red dust, arms outstretched, like head just crossed a finish line at the Olympics. Haid look back up at me, grinning, and yell something. I can't quite remember now. Probably something smart. Probably something that made me want to run even faster next time, just to wipe that grin off his face. That's how it was with us. Always pushing, always daring, always trying to prove something that didn't need proving, but felt like the most important thing in the world at the time. I also remember falling. Or maybe I remember almost falling. The difference don't matter much anymore, because somewhere between the memory and the telling, the story took on a life of its own. But the feeling of losing control, of the ground slipping away, that part is mine, and nobody can take it from me. What else was there to do in that hot Haitian summer sun but run, hide, play, and soak up every drop of daylight the sky offered? We were kids. The whole world was our kingdom, and that hill was our mountain to conquer again and again. The Haitian sun was no joke. It pressed down on everything: the tin roofs, the dusty roads, the mango trees, with a weight that made the air shimmer and dance like it was alive. But we didn't care. Kids don't feel heat the way grown folks do. We just ran until our legs gave out. Everything in Haiti seemed to move slower in that heat. The dogs lying in the shade didn't even lift their heads when you walked by. The vendors in the market fanned themselves with pieces of cardboard and called out their prices in voices worn smooth by repetition and exhaustion. The house itself seemed to breathe with the warmth. The walls held the heat of the day long into the evening, and the tile floors stayed cool enough to soothe bare feet. My grandfather's house was the kind of place that had its own rhythm, its own pulse, its own way of being in the world. If you grew up running wild outside until the streetlights came on, hitting that subscribe button lets me know we share that kind of freedom. The kind you can't replicate no matter how much of the world you see as an adult. The kind that lives in your bones forever. There was also the time I climbed the mango tree in my grandfather's backyard and got stuck. I remember the bark scraping against my legs, the way the branches got thinner the higher I went, and the moment I looked down and realized the ground was a whole lot further than it looked from the bottom. So I did what any self-respecting kid would do. I stayed right where I was, pulled a mango off the branch closest to me, and snacked on it while I waited for somebody to find me. The juice ran down my chin and made my fingers sticky, and I remember thinking that if I was going to be stuck, at least I had good fruit. I hoped the house girl would find me before my grandfather came home. Her name was Marie, and she moved through the house like she was part of it. She knew which floorboards creaked, which doors stuck, and which windows let in the best breeze. She was more likely to help me down with a laugh than a lecture. The Haitian sun was always more bearable in the shade of a tree and a cool breeze, and this tree was my favorite one on the whole property. It had the juiciest mangoes, branches that extended every which way like arms reaching for something just beyond their grasp, and was so full of leaves it shaded almost the entire courtyard. That tree was a whole world unto itself. From up in its branches, I could see over the wall that surrounded the property, out into the street, where people walked by, carrying baskets and calling out to each other in Creole. Up there, I was above everything, untouchable. I'd sit for what felt like hours, watching lizards dart across the walls and chickens peck at the dirt below. My grandfather was a tall, lanky man with a balding spot at the top of his head that he regularly covered with a gray felt hat. That hat looked like it had seen as many good and bad days as he had, and he wore it the way some people wear their history, proudly, stubbornly, like letting it go would mean letting go of something he couldn't afford to lose. When he walked, his steps had a rhythm to them, measured, deliberate, each one landing with purpose. Even his shadow seemed to stand at attention. You could feel him before you saw him. The way the air shifted when he entered a room, the way conversations paused and resumed around his presence, like water flowing around a stone. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, his voice was so deep and so certain that you couldn't help but stop whatever you were doing and listen. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the kind of weight that made silence feel like an interruption, and made every word that left his mouth feel like it mattered. He hated when we climbed his mango tree. Head complained that we'd shake the fruit right out of the branches, that they'd burst and spoil when they hit the ground. Look at this, Head say, picking up a bruised mango and holding it up like evidence. You see what you've done? This was a good mango. Now it's nothing. If you had a grandparent who could communicate a whole lecture with a single look, you know exactly the kind of energy. Describing. Share this with somebody who grew up with that kind of grandparent, the kind whose silence was louder than anybody else's shouting, the kind whose disappointment hit harder than any belt ever could. My grandfather had been a military man. He carried that discipline in everything he did. The way he walked, the way he sat, the way he folded his clothes and placed his hat on the table beside his bed. The yard was his parade ground, the mango tree his post, and we were the intruders who kept breaching his perimeter. There were photographs in the house. Him in uniform, younger, straighter, with eyes that held something I wouldn't understand until I was much older. The kind of eyes that had seen things and decided firmly to keep them to themselves. Head served in ways he never fully talked about, and we knew better than to ask. But there was a softness to him that he tried to hide, the kind that only came out in small gestures. The way he'd leave mangoes on the kitchen counter after he'd picked them himself, already washed and arranged in a bowl. The way he'd sit on the bench in the courtyard and watch us play without saying a word. I think about those small gestures now and realize they were his way of loving us without having to say it. Some people give love in words. My grandfather gave it in washed mangoes and quiet afternoons on the bench. In the way he never actually locked us out of the courtyard, no matter how many times he threatened to. Years later, thousands of miles away from that courtyard, in a house where the floors are hardwood and the trees are oaks instead of mangoes, I find myself watching my own child and reaching for those memories, like reaching for a hand in the dark. Now, as I sit on my porch and watch my daughter play in the grass under the tall oak tree in our yard, I wonder how much of this she'll remember. Shez twirling in the shade, her little legs spinning her around in circles until she gets dizzy and falls into the grass, laughing. I wonder if this day, this ordinary day of swinging in the shade, twirling in the specks of sunlight that filter through the leaves, and inspecting blades of grass for ladybugs, will make it into the archives of her memories. I wonder which moments will stick and which will dissolve like mist when the morning sun hits them. She picks up a ladybug and holds it cupped in her palms, her face full of wonder. She doesn't know yet that one day she might not remember this. She doesn't know that the mind has a way of keeping what it wants and letting go of the rest, and that she don't get a say in which is which. I wonder if I will be part of this memory, or if I will fade into the fuzzy details of the day, the way background characters blur in old photographs? Will she remember me sitting here, watching her? Will she remember the way the light fell through the oak tree, or the way the grass felt between her fingers? I want to tell her to hold on to this moment, to press it deep into her mind like a flower between the pages of a book. But I know it doesn't work that way. You can't choose what stays and what goes. The mind has its own logic, its own agenda, and it don't consult you before it makes its decisions. Nothing of particular significance happened to me on the day that I got stuck in my grandfather's mango tree. Nothing I remember, at least. It was not the first time I had been stuck in a tree. Climbing was never the issue. It was always the trip down that scared me. And yet, I remember that moment with a clarity that defies logic. I remember the juiciness of the mango, how sticky my fingers got, and the look on my grandfather's face when he found me in the tree. The way his eyebrows came together, the way his mouth tightened, and the way his eyes softened even as his voice stayed stern. That look. I've carried it with me across oceans and decades. It wasn't anger, not really. It was something more complicated. Something that lived in the space between worry and frustration, between love and the particular kind of fear that only comes when you care about someone more than they care about themselves. If you've ever been looked at like that by someone who loves you, really loves you, the kind of love that don't need words, then you know why I held on to this memory so tightly. Like this video if you've ever been that kid, the one who didn't know what they had until it was just a story you weren't sure happened anymore. But here's where the story takes a turn I wasn't expecting. Here's where memory stops being something I can hold in my hand and starts becoming something that slips through my fingers like water. Because the thing about memories is that the more you remember them, the less reliable they become. My mother, who grew up in that house, does not remember a mango tree. No matter how much I described it to her, the branches, the shade, the fruit, the courtyard, she looked at me like I was describing somebody else's life entirely. Not my father's house, she would say, tilting her head the way she did when she thought somebody was telling her a story. We were never allowed in the courtyard. How would you have gotten to a tree? She'd ask in wonderment and confusion that I couldn't tell was genuine or performed. I'm sure, if she could, my mother would call me a liar. Haitian mothers don't mince words. But instead, she said, "These memories are not yours, dear," and waved me off with her hand, the way all Haitian parents do. A gesture that means the conversation is over, whether you're done talking or not, as if my memories could somehow belong to someone else. As if the things I held in my heart and carried across an ocean could be picked up and put down like a coat that didn't fit right. It did not matter. If my memories did not reconcile with hers, it was as though they never were. And that's the thing that sat with me, heavy and uncomfortable, like a stone in my shoe. Not that she disagreed with me. Mama's been disagreeing with their children since the beginning of time, but that she could so easily erase my experience with a wave of her hand and a phrase that sounded like love but felt like dismissal. If your mama ever told you that you were remembering something wrong, that what you know happened didn't happen the way you said it did, leave a comment and tell me about it. Because I need to know if this is a universal experience, or if it's just something about Haitian mamas and the way they hold the keys to history. I remember visiting my grandfather before he passed. I wanted so badly to believe my memories and hold on to that day as it was. The sticky mango juice, the rough bark, the shade of that tree, that I booked a flight and made the 1,500-mile journey back to Haiti to ask him about the day he found me in the mango tree. I needed to hear it from him. I needed someone who was there, someone whose word my mother couldn't dismiss, to confirm that I wasn't crazy, that the tree existed, that the courtyard was real, that I had been there, up in those branches, eating mangoes and waiting to be found. The flight felt longer than 1,500 miles. It felt like crossing through time itself, each hour, pulling me further from the woman I had become and closer to the child I had been. The clouds outside the window looked like cotton, and I pressed my forehead against the glass and tried to remember exactly what the sky looked like from underneath that mango tree when the plane broke through the clouds and I saw Haiti below me. The green mountains, the blue water, the red rooftops clustered together like fingers reaching for the sea. Something in my chest tightened. It had been years, too many years, the kind of years that make you forget who you were and remember who you wanted to be. The airport was the same chaos I remembered. People everywhere, voices overlapping in Creole and French. Luggage carts rolling across tile floors that had been cracked and patched so many times they looked like maps of somewhere else entirely. The air hit me the moment I stepped outside. Thick, warm, alive, with the smell of exhaust and spice, and something sweet I couldn't name. A taxi took me through streets I half recognized. Buildings had changed. Some were new, some were gone, and some stood exactly where they'd always been, but looked different somehow, like people who age overnight. The driver talked the whole way, his hands moving as much as his mouth, and I nodded and smiled, and didn't hear a word he said. My grandfather's house appeared at the end of the street, like it had been waiting for me. The wall around the property was shorter than I remembered, or maybe I was just taller. The gate was the same, wrought iron, painted black, with a latch that stuck unless you lifted it just right and pulled at the same time. If you ever went back to a place you grew up and found it both exactly the same and completely different, hit that subscribe button. That dissonance, that feeling of standing in two timelines at once, is something I think we all carry, but rarely talk about. It's the kind of thing that makes you question whether memory is a gift or a burden. The courtyard was the first thing I saw when the gate opened. It was smaller than I remembered. The stone tiles, sun-bleached and uneven, with grass pushing up between the cracks, and there, in the corner, casting its shadow across the yard, like a hand reaching out to greet me. The mango tree. It was smaller too, or maybe I was bigger. Maybe that's what happens when you grow up. The world shrinks around you, and the things that seemed enormous when you were small become ordinary when you're not. But the tree was there. It was real. It existed outside of my memory, outside of my mother's denial, outside of the space between what I knew and what I was told. My grandfather was sitting on the bench, facing the courtyard, exactly where I knew he would be. He was older, of course. He was older, thinner in the face, with hands that rested on his knees, the way old men's hands do when they've done enough work to last several lifetimes and are, finally, quietly, done. My child, he exclaimed with a smile and a warm embrace. His arms still had strength in them, the kind that comes from years of discipline and stubbornness rather than muscle. I melted into him the way children melt into their grandparents, completely, without reservation, without the walls that adulthood builds around the heart. In his arms and the warmth of his body, I felt that it had been too long since our last embrace, too long since Id smelled that scent, a mixture of coffee, tobacco, and something earthy that was just him. Too long since Id felt the rough fabric of his shirt against my cheek and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat underneath. What has an old man done to deserve this visit? He asked, pulling back just enough to look at my face. His eyes were the same, deep, dark, searching, even if everything around them had aged. They held the same quiet intensity, the same careful attention that made you feel like you were the only person in the world when he looked at you. His voice, his scent, the breeze that carried the faint smell of mango blossoms, and the sounds of life passing just beyond the house gates. Motorcycles, voices, a radio playing somewhere in the distance, all reminded me of how much I had missed home. Not just the place, but the feeling of being known by the walls and the trees and the very ground beneath my feet. It brought tears to my eyes that surprised us both. I didn't plan it. I didn't want it. But there they were, filling my eyes and spilling over before I could stop them. Years of distance, of silence, of living in a country that felt like a borrowed coat. All of it came rushing up and out in a way I had no control over. Do not cry, he quipped, shifting uncomfortably on the bench. You are here now, and I remembered how uncomfortable tears made him feel, how his whole body would stiffen, how his eyes would dart away like he was looking for an escape route, how his hands would grip his knees as if holding on to something solid would keep the emotion at bay. I never understood how a military man with so much strength and discipline could handle bullets, bombs, and the chaos of the battlefield, yet floundered at the sight of tears. It was like watching a mountain tremble at a raindrop. It didn't make sense, and it didn't have to. It was just who he was. Fierce against the world, helpless against the people he loved. If you had a parent or grandparent who could face down anything in the world, but couldn't handle seeing you cry, share this right now. That contradiction, that tenderness, hidden inside toughness, is the kind of thing that shapes you forever. It teaches you that love don't always look like softness. Sometimes it looks like a man would go to war for you, but can't watch you shed a tear. It made me smile. The kind of smile that comes from knowing someone so deeply that their contradictions become comforting rather than confusing. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and sat up straighter, matching his posture the way I always did without meaning to. A habit born from years of sitting beside him on that bench. We sat in silence for some time, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling because it's already full of history, of love, of all the words that have been said and all the ones that never will be. The breeze moved through the courtyard like it had somewhere to be, and the evening sun painted everything gold. The mango trees' shadow stretched across the yard, longer now as the sun dipped lower. I watched the leaves flutter and thought about how many afternoons it spent in those branches, how many mangoes it'd eaten, how many times it looked down from above and felt like the whole world was mine. "Do you remember the mango tree, Grandpa?" I asked him. The question came out softer than I intended, almost fragile, like I was afraid the wrong answer would break something I couldn't repair. I held my breath without meaning to and waited for him to respond. He looked at me, then at the tree, then back at me. A slow smile spread across his face, the kind that starts at the eyes and takes its time reaching the mouth. "You mean this one right there, that you fell off of after I told you not to climb it?" He responded affectionately while pointing at the tree that cast shade on us. "Yes," I smiled. I had forgotten that part. Or maybe I had blocked it out of my memory entirely. The falling, the impact, the pain. Maybe the mind does that sometimes, takes the hard edges off a memory and leaves only the soft parts, the parts you can hold without cutting yourself. Mama said, "We were never allowed in the courtyard," I continued, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I needed him to know. I needed him to understand why I'd come all this way, why this mattered so much, why a tree and a courtyard and a memory had become the thing I couldn't let go of. The courtyard. My courtyard. He interrupted, and his voice carried that same deep certainty I remembered from childhood, the kind that made you stop mid-sentence and forget what you were saying, the kind that reminded you who built this house, who planted that tree, who made the rules in this place. "Yes," she said. I started, but he cut me off again. "No, this time more certain, more absolute." The word landed between us like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples spread outward in every direction. "Not my daughter. She would not say such a thing," he continued, shaking his head slowly. "She and the boys were always in the yard, climbing my trees and spoiling my mangoes." He chuckled. The sound was warm and round, like it came from somewhere deep in his chest. "No matter how much I insisted, or how many times I punished you, I could not keep you off of it. Punished you." The words hung in the air between us, and for a moment I thought I had misheard him. The breeze kept blowing. The leaves kept rustling. The world kept turning. But something had shifted, something small and almost imperceptible, like a crack in a foundation that you don't notice until the whole structure starts to lean. "You mean Mama, right?" I asked. My voice was steady, but my heart had started to beat in a way I could feel in my throat. Something was happening. Something I wasn't prepared for. The ground beneath me felt less solid than it had a moment ago, and the tree above me seemed to lean in closer, as if it too wanted to hear his answer. "What?" he said, and the word came out confused, almost startled, like he'd been woken from a dream he didn't know he was having. He blinked at me, and I watched something move behind his eyes, a fog, a cloud, a searching that I hadn't seen before. It was there, and then it wasn't, replaced by something that looked like clarity but felt like performance. "You mean you could not keep Mama off of it?" I repeated, slower this time, giving each word its own space, its own weight. I watched his face carefully, the way you watch a surface for ripples, looking for any sign that would tell me what was happening underneath. "Right," he replied, almost in a whisper. And then he looked at me as though it were for the first time. Not the way he'd looked at me when I walked through the gate, not the way he'd looked at me when he embraced me, but really looked at me, like he was trying to see past my face and into something deeper. "That's what I said." "Maybe she is confused," he continued, but the certainty was gone from his voice. It had been replaced by something thinner, something translucent, like a window that lets you see through to the other side, whether it wants to or not. Those memories aren't hers. Those memories aren't hers. The same words my mother had used, the same dismissal, the same erasure, delivered in the same tone, but from a different mouth. And, just like before, I was left standing in the space between what I knew and what I was being told, with nothing to hold on to but the feeling of sticky mango juice on my fingers. If you've ever had someone you love look at you and not quite see you, not quite recognize the truth of who you are or what you remember, drop a comment below. That ache, that particular loneliness of being unseen by the people who should know you best. It's something I think more of us carry than we ever admit. I remember we sat in silence afterward. Not the comfortable kind from before, not the kind that's full of love and shared history. This silence was different. It was the kind that fills the space between two people who have just realized they might be standing on different ground, looking at the same thing from different angles and seeing completely different worlds. The evening became dusk. The sky shifted from gold to orange to a deep purple that reminded me of the mangoes I used to pick from that tree. The breeze cooled and carried with it the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. Doors closing, radios playing, children being called inside by voices that carried love and authority in equal measure. Our versions of events filled up the space between us, his and mine and my mother's. Three people, three memories, three truths that couldn't all exist in the same space at the same time, and yet they did. They coexisted, overlapping and contradicting, each one as real and as fragile as the next. I looked at my grandfather in the fading light and saw not just the man before me, but the man he had been. The tall, lanky figure in the gray felt hat who had stood at the base of that tree and looked up at me with that look it carried for decades. That man was still there, underneath the years and the fog, somewhere between who he was and who he was becoming. I wanted to ask him more. I wanted to ask him about the falling, about the punishment, about whether the me in his memory was actually the me in mine. But the words wouldn't come. They sat in my throat like stones, too heavy to swallow and too sharp to speak, and so I let them stay where they were. If this story is hitting you in a place you didn't expect, if you're realizing that maybe your own memories have their own truth that nobody else has to validate, hit that like button. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is hold on to what we know, even when the world tells us to let go. The drive back to the airport the next morning was quiet. I watched Haiti through the window of the taxi. The same streets, the same buildings, the same chaos. But everything looked different now. Not because it had changed, but because I had. Something inside me had shifted, like a tectonic plate, moving so slowly. You don't feel it until the whole landscape has rearranged itself. My grandfather stood at the gate as I left. He waved, and I waved back, and neither of us said what we were thinking. What was there to say? That memory is unreliable? That love is imperfect? That the people we trust most can carry a version of us that doesn't match the one we carry of ourselves? He looked small, standing there, smaller than I'd ever seen him. The grey felt hat sat on his head like a crown that had outlived its kingdom, and his frame, once so imposing, so commanding, seemed to have folded in on itself, like a letter that had been read and reread until the creases gave way. On the plain, I closed my eyes and tried to picture the mango tree, not the one I'd seen the day before, smaller and ordinary, but the one from my memory, enormous, majestic, filling the courtyard with shade and the air with the promise of something sweet. I held on to that version. I held on to it tight, because Hera's what I know now, what that trip taught me in a way no book or therapist or conversation ever could. Memory ain't about accuracy. It's about meaning. It's about the moments that shape us, that define us, that become the architecture of who we are. Whether they happened exactly the way we remember or not, the mango tree was real. My grandfather confirmed it. But the girl in the tree, the one he remembered, the one who fell, the one he punished, was she me, or was she my mother? And did it matter? Did it change anything about the love I felt in those branches? The safety I felt in that shade? The way that tree became my whole world for an afternoon? Maybe my mother's memories got mixed up with mine somewhere along the way. Maybe she told me stories about her childhood so many times that they became mine, planted in my mind, like seeds that grew into trees I thought I'd climbed myself. Maybe that's what happens in families. Stories get passed down and inherited and worn until you can't tell where they end and you begin. If you ever wondered whether a memory is really yours or whether it came from somebody else's story, share this with them. Maybe they'll recognize something in it. Maybe it'll start a conversation you've been avoiding. Or maybe it'll just sit there quiet and patient, waiting for the right moment to be understood. Or maybe, and this is the part that keeps me up at night, maybe my grandfather was the one whose memory had shifted. Maybe he was the one holding on to a version of events that felt true, even if it wasn't accurate. Maybe in his old age, his mind had begun to blur the lines between his daughter and his granddaughter, between one child and another, between one afternoon and 1,000 afternoons, all rolled into one. I don't know. He'll never know. And that's the part that haunts me, not the not knowing, but the acceptance that some things will never be resolved. Some questions don't have answers. Some truths exist in the space between people, in the silence that follows a conversation, in the versions of events that fill up the room when nobody's talking. I came home to my daughter playing under the oak tree. She was still twirling, still laughing, still inspecting blades of grass with the kind of focus only children and scientists possess. She looked up at me and smiled, and in that smile, I saw every memory I'd ever held and every one I'd ever lost. I sat down on the porch and watched her. The oak tree cast its shadow across the yard, and the late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves in specks of gold. The breeze carried the smell of grass and something sweet. Not mangoes, not here, but sweet enough to make me close my eyes and remember. I wonder if there will come a day when I will dismiss my daughter's recollection of her life. If shall, tell me about an afternoon under this oak tree, and I'll shake my head and say, not my yard. We were never allowed out there. How would you have gotten to a tree if you're a parent who's ever caught yourself about to say, that's not how it happened to your child? Pause. Take a breath. Ask yourself if your version is the only one that matters, or if maybe, just maybe, their memory is as real and as true as anything you've ever held. Hit subscribe if you're committed to letting your children own their stories. I wonder if this disconnect is a rite of passage into motherhood. If every generation eventually stands on one side of a memory while their child stands on the other, both certain, both justified, both holding a truth that the other can't see. If the gap between what we remember and what they remember is the space where growing up happens, and I wonder if my daughter will quietly accept it as I have. If she'll nod and swallow her truth and carry it inside her like a seed that grows in the dark, blooming only when she's far enough away from me to trust that what she remembers is real, even if nobody else does. I don't have answers. I don't think anybody does. But I know this, that mango tree, whether it was my memory or my mother's, or my grandfather's, or some tangled combination of all three, is as real to me as the oak tree in my yard. It shaped me, it held me, it fed me, and no amount of disagreement can take that away. So I let my daughter twirl. I let her inspect her ladybugs, and feel her grass and live in her moment, and I don't tell her to remember it. I don't tell her to hold on. I just sit on the porch and watch, and I let the afternoon be what it is. Not a memory yet, not a story yet, just a day, just a girl under a tree, just a mother watching. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us get. Moments that become memories, that become stories, that become something between truth and myth, something that belongs to everyone and no one, something that lives in the space between what happened and what we carry. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own memories and the people who shaped them, leave a comment. Tell me about a memory you hold that nobody else remembers. Tell me about a moment that shaped you that someone else has erased or rewritten or claimed as their own. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, stories about family, memory, love, and the spaces between us, hit that subscribe button and join me. Because these are the stories that make us who we are. These are the stories that connect us. And in a world that's constantly trying to tell us what to remember, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust ourselves. Like this video, if you've ever held on to a memory that nobody else could see, share it with someone who needs to know their memories matter. And come back for the next story, because I've got more to tell, and something tells me you do too. Some nights, when the house is quiet and my daughter is asleep, and the oak tree outside her window casts its shadow across the lawn like a sentinel standing guard, I sit in the kitchen and try to piece it all together. I make tea I don't drink and stare at walls that don't talk back and let the memories come. They come in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes overwhelming, but always in fragments, never whole, never complete. never the full picture. Like a puzzle somebody scattered, and you're trying to assemble without the box, without the image on the lid, without knowing how many pieces are missing, or if some of them belong to a different puzzle entirely. The mango tree comes back most often. In my dreams, it's enormous, so big its branches touch the sky and its roots go all the way down to the center of the earth. In it again, small and sticky and unafraid, and the world below is distant and unimportant. Up there, nothing can touch me. If you ever dream about a place from your childhood that feels more real than the place itself, leave a comment. I want to know if dreams count as memories, if the things our minds build while we sleep are any less valid than the things we carry while we're awake. My grandfather called me a few months after that visit. His voice on the phone sounded thinner than I remembered, like something had been worn down between then and now. He asked how I was, how my daughter was, whether I was eating enough. The questions old people ask when the real questions are too heavy to lift. We talked about nothing for a while. The weather, the neighbors, the mangoes, that season. Smaller than usual, he said, not as sweet. He talked about them the way farmers talk about crops, with a mix of resignation and stubborn hope that next year would be better, that the tree would remember what it was supposed to do. Then there was a pause, not the comfortable kind from the bench in the courtyard, but the other kind, the kind that hums with something unsaid, the kind that vibrates at a frequency only family can tune into. I waited. I'd learned that with him, you don't push, you wait. The words come when they're ready. I've been thinking, he said finally, and his voice dropped to that low register. That meant, listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. About that day, the tree, you. The words came out, careful, measured, like he was placing each one on a scale and checking the weight before moving on. My heart did something I can't describe. Not a race, not a skip, more like a hold, a suspension, like time itself leaned in to listen and held its breath alongside me. I gripped the phone tighter and pressed it against my ear until the plastic edge dug into my skin. I remember finding someone in that tree, he said. I remember the mangoes on the ground, the sticky hands, the look on my own face when I looked up. But I don't remember whose face looked back at me anymore. He said it, without sadness, without apology, just fact, the way he said everything. If you ever watched someone you love lose their grip on the edges of their own story, you know the particular grief that comes with it. It's not the sharp kind that cuts you open. It's the slow kind, the erosion kind, the kind that wears you down grain by grain until you realize the landscape has changed. They were all in that tree, he continued. My daughter, her brothers, you, everyone small enough to fit in those branches and foolish enough to climb that high. After a while, the faces blurred together. After a while, one child in a tree looked like every child I'd ever loved. I closed my eyes and let his words settle over me like a blanket. Not because they were comforting. They weren't, not entirely, but because they were honest in a way that transcended accuracy. He wasn't telling me what happened. He was telling me what he felt. And feelings, unlike facts, don't have to be precise to be true. So, it might have been me, I said. Not a question, a statement. a claiming, a reaching across the distance, geographic, generational, temporal, to touch the hem of a memory that might or might not be mine, but that I was not willing to let go of. It might have been you, he agreed. It might have been your mother. It might have been both of you on different days that became the same day in my mind. I am an old man. My mind does what it wants now. It rearranges things. It moves furniture. I didn't tell it to move. If you've ever had a conversation with an aging parent or grandparent that felt like standing on shifting ground, share this with someone who needs to hear it. That ground, unstable, uncertain, constantly rearranging itself beneath your feet, is the ground we all eventually have to learn to stand on. He laughed then, and the sound was both familiar and foreign. Familiar because it was his laugh, the one I'd known my whole life. Foreign because it carried something new in it, a lightness, a release, like he'd been holding something heavy for a long time and had finally set it down. "You want the truth?" he asked, and I could hear him shifting in his chair, the way he always did before saying something that mattered. "The truth is, I loved watching you all in that tree. I pretended to be angry because that's what grandfathers do. But I stood at that window and watched you climb and felt something I couldn't name. What did you feel?" I asked, and my voice cracked on the last word because I already knew the answer. I'd known it my whole life, in the way you know things before you have the words for them, in the way children know they're loved before anyone ever says it out loud, like the tree was doing what I planted it to do, he said. Not giving fruit, giving shade, giving a place for children to be children, giving a reason to yell and pretend to be angry, when really I was just grateful, grateful that someone was climbing it, that it wasn't just standing there alone. I pressed my hand over my mouth and breathed through my fingers. The tears came again, but this time I didn't try to stop them. I let them fall onto the kitchen table, onto the tea I still hadn't drunk, onto the phone I was holding with both hands like a lifeline. If you have someone in your life who showed you love in ways they never said out loud, hit that like button. Because that kind of love, the quiet kind, the kind that hides behind stern looks and pretended anger, is the kind that stays with you long after the words are gone. "Grandpa," I said, and the word came out thick and heavy. "I remember being in that tree. I remember the mangoes. I remember your face when you found me. I don't know if it was me or Mama or both of us, but I remember it. It's mine. I've carried it my whole life." "Then keep it," he said simply. "A memory that has been carried that long and that far has earned the right to belong to whoever holds it. It doesn't matter whose it was. It matters whose it is now, and it's yours. You earned it." We talked a little more after that, about small things. The tree, the yard, the gate that still stuck, the bench where we'd sat together. He told me the mangoes that year were smaller, but sweeter, and I told him that sounded like a metaphor for something. And he laughed again and said, I'd been in America too long. When we hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. The tea had gone cold. The house was still quiet. Outside, the oak tree swayed in a wind I couldn't feel, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at something, only it could see. I held the phone against my chest like a letter I'd been waiting my whole life to receive. That was the last real conversation I had with my grandfather. He passed a few months later, quietly, the way he did everything, without fuss, without drama, without asking anyone for anything he wasn't willing to give himself. The call came in the morning, and I answered it knowing what it was. Before I said hello, if you've ever lost someone whose voice you can still hear in the silence, subscribe, not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, but because grief is a road we all walk, and walking it together, even through a screen, makes the distance feel a little shorter. I flew back for the funeral. The house was full of people I half knew, relatives, neighbors, old military friends who stood straighter than their bodies wanted to, and saluted a coffin with hands that trembled. My mother was there, black dress, black hat, black purse, holding herself together the way she always did. The mango tree stood in the courtyard, like a guest at the service. Its branches hung lower than I remembered, heavy with fruit that nobody was picking. The courtyard was full of people who hadn't been in it in years, and I wondered if my grandfather was somewhere watching, pretending to be annoyed. My mother and I stood beside each other at the graveside. We didn't touch. We didn't speak. We stood in the space between us, the same space that had been there since the mango tree conversation, since the courtyard disagreement, since she told me my memories weren't mine. Afterward, back at the house, people ate and talked and laughed in the way people do when they're celebrating a life rather than mourning a death. Mangoes were everywhere, in bowls, on tables, being peeled and sliced and passed around by hands that didn't know the history they were holding. My mother sat on the bench, his bench, the one facing the courtyard, the one where he'd sat and watched us play, the one where we'd had our last conversation about the tree. She looked small on it, smaller than I'd ever seen her, and for a moment she wasn't my mother. She was just a woman missing her father. I sat down beside her. Not close, not far, close enough to feel her warmth without touching, close enough to speak without raising my voice, close enough that the space between us felt like a bridge rather than a wall. Do you see it? I asked, nodding toward the tree. She looked at it for a long time, her eyes moving from the roots to the trunk, to the branches, to the fruit, hanging like ornaments from a Christmas tree. Nobody decorated. She squinted, the way people do when they're trying to see something. That's right in front of them. I see a tree, she said. A mango tree, in my father's courtyard. She paused. I don't remember it being there when I was young, but I see it now. Her voice was quiet, careful, like someone admitting something they'd been denying for a long time and weren't sure they were ready to let go of. That's all I wanted, I said. For someone to see it. And she looked at me then. Really looked at me. And I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not agreement, not apology, not concession. Something softer, something that lived in the space between right and wrong. If you've ever had a moment with your mother where words weren't enough, but silence was too much, share this with her. Not to prove a point, not to win an argument, but to say, I see you, I see the tree, I see the courtyard, I see the space between us, and am willing to sit in it. My daughter asks me about Haiti sometimes. She's heard snippets, the mango tree, the rocky hill, the grandfather with the gray felt hat. She asks questions the way children do, without filter or agenda, And I answer the way mothers do, carefully, lovingly, editing as I go. Was the tree really that big? She asked one evening, sitting on my lap while the oak tree outside cast its shadow across her bedroom floor. Bigger, I said. Biggest tree I ever saw. And in that moment, it was true. In that moment, memory and truth sat side by side and held hands. Can we go see it? She asked, and her eyes were wide with the kind of wonder that makes you want to protect it forever, to keep it safe from the world that will eventually tell her that her memories don't match, that her version is wrong, that what she holds isn't hers to hold. Someday, I told her, someday we'll go. And I meant it, not because I needed to prove anything, not because I needed validation or confirmation or permission, but because that tree, whether it remembered me or not, was part of who I was, and who I was is part of who she is. If this story made you think about the memories you're carrying and the ones you're passing on, drop a comment and tell me about your tree. We all have one. The thing that was bigger than us, the place that held us, the moment that shaped us, even if nobody else remembers it the way we do. And if you want to keep sharing these moments with me, these stories about the spaces between us, the memories that make us, the love that holds us together, even when we can't agree on what happened, hit subscribe. Because the stories don't stop. They just get passed down, like mangoes from a tree, from one hand to the next. Like this, if someone you love is no longer here, but lives in your memory. Share this if you've ever been told your memory was wrong. Comment if you're holding on to something nobody else can see. Subscribe if you believe that the things we carry matter, even when, especially when, they can't be proven.